Some of the biggest names in rock history didn't just flirt with success, they had it all and then lost it. One legendary drummer blew millions on drugs and a failed business venture. Another global superstar was betrayed by someone he trusted, losing tens of millions overnight. And one iconic figure ended up living in a van after years of fame. These aren't cautionary tales. They're real stories of how fortune can disappear just as fast as it arrives. So, hit songs, sold-out tours, and millions of records. None of that was enough to protect these rock stars from going broke. Let's get into it. There was a point in time when Sly Stone was worth an estimated $40 million. And there came another point in time when he was found living in a beat-up white van on a residential street in one of the roughest neighborhoods in Los Angeles. Sly Stone, one of the pioneers of funk music as mastermind for Sly and the Family Stone, became homeless and was found living out of a white van in Los Angeles. The music legend had been grappling with the loss of his fortune due to substance abuse, mismanagement, and a life of excess. The fall didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, grinding collapse that spanned decades. Back in the late 1960s and early 1970s, Sly and the Family Stone were one of the most revolutionary acts in American music. Sly and the Family Stone were a rather innovative band for their combination of funk and rock, and the band was also one of the few to have the privilege of performing at Woodstock. Their hits, Everyday People, Family Affair, Dance to the Music, were anthems that bridged racial divides and genre boundaries. Stone's band had 3 #1 singles with Everyday People, Thank You, Fell It and Maybe Mice Elf Again, and Family Affair. In his heyday, he lived at 783 Bel Air Road, a 4-bedroom, 5,432 square foot Beverly Hills mansion that once belonged to John Phillips of the Mamas and the Papas. The Tudor-style house was tricked out in his signature funky black, white, and red color scheme, shag carpet, Tiffany lamps in every room, a round waterbed in the master bedroom. There were parties where Stevie Wonder, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, and Miles Davis would drop by, where Etta James would break into At Last by the bar. This was the life at the very summit, but at the peak of his fame in the late 1960s, Stone started experimenting with cocaine and PCP, and his songwriting began to suffer. The drugs hollowed out the creative engine that drove the entire operation. By 1975, the Family Stone had splintered apart, and Sly's trajectory veered sharply downward. The gigs dried up, the money dwindled, and then it got worse. His financial woes were also in part due to a 1984 deal where he sold his music publishing rights to Michael Jackson for a reported $1 million. That single transaction effectively stripped him of the long-term royalty income that could have sustained him for life. Then came the manager troubles. Stone sued his manager Jerry Goldstein for $50 million, alleging fraud and 20 years of stolen royalty payments. Stone sued his manager Jerry Goldstein for $50 million, alleging fraud and 20 years of stolen royalty payments. Stone said he was tricked into signing a contract with Goldstein in 1989, which gave his manager control of his finances. By 2011, the full scale of his downfall was laid bare in the national press. He parked his van on a residential street in LA's rough Crenshaw neighborhood. A retired couple allowed Stone to shower at their house and made sure he eats, while their son served as his assistant and driver. He continued to record music on a laptop computer from inside the walls of his home on wheels. Stone, then 68, spoke of how his use of drugs and money mismanagement led him to a homeless life on the road. He didn't frame it as despair. He told the press he liked his small camper and simply didn't want to return to a fixed home. But the numbers told a different story. A man who once headlined Woodstock was now relying on the generosity of strangers to eat 1 meal a day. Stone has since started making a modest income again, thanks to streaming service royalties, minimal though they are. But the distance between a Beverly Hills mansion and a van in Crenshaw remains one of the most staggering falls from grace in rock history. Meat Loaf sold records, a staggering number of records. Bat Out of Hell sold approximately 43 million copies. His 1977 album, Bat Out of Hell, is one of the highest selling of all time, a ranking it shares with such all-time classics as AC/DC's Back in Black and Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. Known for such classic songs as 2 Out of 3 Ain't Bad and Paradise by the Dashboard Light, the album made the singer a major, if unlikely, star. So how does a man who recorded one of the best-selling albums in music history end up filing for bankruptcy? The answer involves a lost voice, a broken partnership, and a blizzard of lawsuits. While attempting to create a follow-up to the huge hit album, he lost his voice and wasn't able to complete the recording until 1981, by which time he was no longer popular. The follow-up, Dead Ringer, was a commercial disappointment. The album sold only a tiny fraction of the amount that its predecessor sold, and by 1983 he was $1.6 million in debt, forcing him to declare bankruptcy. But The Voice was only part of the catastrophe. At around the same time, his old producer Jim Steinman, along with others, had decided to sue Meat Loaf. Steinman was the visionary behind the theatrical bombast of Bat Out of Hell, the soaring arrangements, the operatic excess. Without Steinman, Meat Loaf was creatively adrift, and with Steinman dragging him into court, the financial bleeding accelerated mercilessly. With over 40 lawsuits mounted against him, his only recourse was filing Chapter 11 bankruptcy. For nearly a decade, Meat Loaf floated in a kind of artistic limbo, still performing, still grinding, but unable to recapture the commercial magic that had once made him a household name. The music industry had moved on. Tastes shifted. The bombastic rock opera sound that had defined Bat Out of Hell felt like a relic of a different era. And then, improbably, the resurrection arrived. In 1993, his career rebounded in a big way with the release of Bat Out of Hell 2, Back into Hell, which went to #1 in 3 countries and featured the single I'd Do Anything for Love, But I Won't Do That, which went to #1 in no less than 28 countries. Although this comeback improved his finances, the period of bankruptcy illustrated how sudden fame, combined with complicated contracts, can lead to massive money troubles in rock music. Meat Loaf proved you could come back from the financial grave, but the decade spent in that grave was brutal, humbling, and very, very real. Billy Joel is one of the most accomplished recording artists of all time. His catalog is massive, his tours sell out. His monthly residency at Madison Square Garden is legendary. And yet, Billy Joel is one of the most successful recording artists of all time. But that hasn't exempted him from financial difficulties, and he has declared bankruptcy not just once, but multiple times. The worst instance involved the man Joel trusted the most. His former manager, Frank Weber, siphoned $30 million from him for personal loans and dicey business investments, none of which Joel was aware of until an audit took place years after the fact. Weber wasn't just a manager, he was Billy Joel's one-time manager, brother-in-law, and daughter's godfather. Let that sit for a moment. The man entrusted with guarding Joel's fortune was married into his family and was the godfather of his child. And this man used Joel's money in a series of bad loans and risky business investments. Billy Joel was shocked when he found out years afterward in a financial audit. By the time the fraud was uncovered, the damage was catastrophic. Joel had been bled dry by someone who sat across from him at Thanksgiving dinner. He ended up suing Weber for $90 million for fraud. The lawsuit dragged through the courts, becoming one of the most publicized artist-manager disputes in music history. Joel eventually recovered, returned to performing and recording, and rebuilt his finances through relentless touring. But the betrayal left scars that went far beyond money. He lost not just a fortune, he lost faith in someone who was supposed to be family. The Joel story is a particularly sharp reminder that in the music business, the most dangerous threat to an artist's wealth is not reckless spending or substance abuse. It's the person holding the checkbook. David Crosby is as synonymous with rock and roll as the Fender Stratocaster. He broke through as a member of the Beards in the 1960s, before becoming a full-fledged superstar as a member of Crosby, Stills, and Nash. The music was transcendent. The lifestyle was ruinous. Like many of his contemporaries, Crosby was an avid drug user. In the 80s, he entered into a downward spiral that included arrests for drug and weapons possession, driving under the influence, and hit and run. By the mid-80s, he was addicted to alcohol, cocaine, and heroin. He later claimed to have spent millions on his drug habits, all of which contributed to a decline in record sales. The numbers are dizzying. In 2003, Crosby told Bankrate he estimated he'd burned through $25 million over the course of his career. $25 million. Gone. Not stolen by a manager or clawed away by the IRS. Just consumed by an insatiable appetite for drugs and the chaos that comes with it. By 1985, he had hit bottom, and his behavior spiraled out of control, culminating in his arrest for hit-and-run driving, possession of a concealed weapon, and possession of cocaine. None of this was particularly good for his record sales, and the singer filed for bankruptcy as his once robust career declined. Eventually, Crosby did hard time. The combination of drugs and drama had not been nice to his bank account. In 1985, he filed for bankruptcy. When he got out of jail, he was so broke that he had to live in a friend's spare bedroom and even had to borrow his clothes. Think about that image, a man who helped define the sound of the 1960s and 1970s, a rock and roll Hall of Famer, borrowing someone else's shirt because he didn't have one of his own. That is what $25 million worth of self-destruction looks like when the dust settles. He eventually made his money back by continuing to work, but was arrested for possessing a gun and drugs yet again in 2004. Although he continued to perform, the period of financial instability underscored the dangers of substance abuse and its effect on an artist's livelihood. Crosby kept performing well into his later years, but his financial story remains one of the most cautionary tales in rock, not because of bad contracts or shady managers, but because of what happens when the enemy is yourself. Fleetwood Mac is one of the highest-selling bands in history. Rumors alone has sold over 40 million copies worldwide. And Mick Fleetwood, the towering drummer who co-founded the band and gave it his name, went flat broke. Mick Fleetwood of Fleetwood Mac filed for bankruptcy in 1984, owing nearly $3.7 million. He blamed his financial problems on severe drug and alcohol addiction. The story of where the money went is almost absurdly dramatic. His cash was lost somewhere between Australia and his very own nose. According to some reports, Mick spent a whopping $60 million on cocaine throughout his career. He also blew a huge chunk of change on a 1,000-acre farm in Australia. $60 million on cocaine. Let that number breathe for a second. That is not a typo. The man funneled a sum that could have purchased a professional sports franchise directly into his bloodstream. And then there was the Australian dream. Fleetwood told Rolling Stone, "I actually immigrated to Australia and gave up my green card. I thought it was a great place for all my friends and family, but it was also a pipe dream that literally took me to the poorhouse." He admitted bluntly, "I went broke." Mick Fleetwood, co-founder of Fleetwood Mac, enjoyed success with hits like Go Your Own Way and Rhiannon. During the 1970s and early 1980s, he earned large sums from record sales and tours. However, his extravagant spending, combined with real estate missteps, put him in a precarious financial situation. By the mid-1980s, Fleetwood declared bankruptcy, surprising fans who assumed his wealth was secure. He later spoke openly about his problems, attributing them to poor decisions and a lack of financial planning. Fleetwood was able to bounce back from bankruptcy, but never amassed the same fortune as his bandmate Stevie Nicks. The Fleetwood Mac founder filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy after accruing over $3.5 million of debt. Today, Fleetwood is hardly what we'd consider broke, but his $20 million net worth is nothing compared to Stevie Nicks' $75 million. That gap tells you everything. Same band, same tours, same albums. But one member blew through a fortune that the other member managed to keep and grow. The difference was discipline and about $60 million worth of cocaine. Leonard Cohen, robbed by his own manager at 71. Leonard Cohen's story is unlike any other on this list. He didn't go broke because of drugs. He didn't go broke because of reckless spending. While he was living as a monk on a mountaintop, from the 71-year-old's accounts, while also surreptitiously selling many of his publishing rights, at a monastery on Mount Baldy in California. Cohen paid little attention to his financial affairs and so was easily exploited by a conniving personal manager. Rather than going towards funding his retirement years and inure to the benefit of his children, as Cohen had intended, Lynch began withdrawing funds from the company without Cohen's knowledge or consent. Cohen claimed that his alleged ex-lover and manager of 16 years had stolen more than $5 million from his assets, leaving him with the still not too shabby sum of $150,000. For a man who was 71 years old, $150,000 was not a retirement fund. It was a ticking clock. Lynch and Cohen worked together for 17 years, but Cohen fired her in 2004 and sued her in 2005. A court ordered Lynch to pay Cohen $9.5 million. She never did repay the money, although she was sentenced to 18 months in prison for harassing and threatening him. So what does a 71-year-old man with $150,000 and a legendary back catalog do? He goes back to work. Cohen said simply, "I had to go to work. I have no money left." And the comeback was staggering. During the next 5 years, selling out bigger and bigger stages, Cohen's touring propelled his career to heights he had never seen since emerging as one of the most important songwriters of the 1960s. Between a lengthy run from 2008 to 2010, which included triumphant appearances at Coachella and Glastonbury, and then a shorter leg in 2012 and 2013, The previously stage-weary Cohen played 387 shows to more than 2 million people. The robbery forced Leonard Cohen back onto the stage, and that stage turned out to be the greatest chapter of his career. The injustice sparked a renaissance that millions of fans got to witness. Cohen toured the world, filled arenas, and proved that even at 73, 74, 75, he could command a room like no one else. The betrayal was devastating, but it inadvertently gave the world one of the most remarkable late-career comebacks in music history. Ted Nugent, Mink Farms, Clydesdales, and bankruptcy. Ted Nugent is not the name you'd expect on a list like this. Thanks to 1970s hits like Cat Scratch Fever and Stranglehold, hard rock guitarist Ted Nugent was at one time among the highest-grossing concert attractions in America. He was also famously straight edge, no drugs, no alcohol, ever, and yet he still went broke. Ted Nugent used to sell out shows across America, which made him a lot of money. However, you're only as good as the people you trust. His managers made some bad decisions with his money, putting his assets into failing businesses, which included a mink farm. These failing ventures forced him to declare bankruptcy in 1980. The rocker declared bankruptcy back in 1980. He had a bunch of bad investments that included a mink farm, a herd of Clydesdales, and even a failed hotel in Flint, Michigan. These are the investments that Ted Nugent's trusted financial advisors thought were smart moves with a rock star's fortune. Not real estate in a growing city, not diversified index funds, mink, horses, and a hotel in a city that was already in economic decline. Nugent declared bankruptcy in 1980 as a result, but he recovered before the decade's end and still enjoys a busy career today. Nugent bounced back, eventually rebuilding his finances through touring and various media ventures. But his story stands as living proof that you don't need a single drop of alcohol or a grain of any substance to go broke as a rock star. All you need is the wrong people managing your money, and a pen to sign whatever they put in front of you. Dee Snider. Grunge killed his bank account. In the mid-1980s, Dee Snider was everywhere. Twisted Sister was riding high with a quadruple platinum album and crazy music videos that went viral well before YouTube. Dee Snider, as the primary songwriter, was making a ton of money. We're Not Gonna Take It and I Wanna Rock were inescapable. Snider was the snarling, sneering face of glam metal rebellion. And then two things happened that dismantled everything. First, the Senate hearings. He was called before the Senate to defend his violent music videos. In order to get the politicians on his side, Snider mentioned he was a teetotaling family man who never drank, smoked, or did drugs. That ruined his credibility with his fans. And then musical taste changed, and Twisted Sister was over. When the glam metal scene faded, Snider found himself with heavy debts. The band's breakup in 1987 cut off a major income source, forcing him to face mounting bills. The money stopped coming in, but the spending didn't stop going out. Snider later discussed how he tried to maintain the rock star lifestyle long after the checks stopped rolling in. He told Fox News that by 1995 he was flat broke. Snider said it was a gradual slide, and that despite the warning signs, he just kept spending, and that unlike other bankrupt musicians, he didn't have a drug problem or a corrupt manager he could blame for his financial problems. That honesty is what makes Snider's story unique. There was no villain, no swindler, no addiction to blame. He simply lived beyond his means and refused to acknowledge that the ride was over. Grunge swept in and washed glam metal off the map, and Snider was left standing in the wreckage, watching the bills pile up while pretending it was still 1985. He rebuilt his career through radio hosting and reality TV, but the experience taught him about the fragile nature of fame. Snider eventually clawed his way back through sheer hustle radio shows, acting gigs, reality TV, and the occasional Twisted Sister reunion. But he's the first to admit that the bankruptcy was entirely his own doing. Tom Petty, the man who went broke on purpose. Every other rock star on this list went broke despite their best efforts to avoid it. Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers signed with a small label called Shelter Records when they got their start, with Petty also signing away his publishing for $10,000. After 2 albums on Shelter, the label was sold to MCA, but Petty wouldn't go along, leading both labels to sue him for breach of contract. Petty was furious. He felt like a commodity being traded between corporations without his consent. Petty was known as a staunch guardian of his artistic control and artistic freedom. In 1979, he was involved in a legal dispute when ABC Records was sold to MCA Records. He refused to be transferred to another record label without his consent, so he did something nobody expected. Tom Petty, in his brilliance, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy relief, with the plan to reject his publishing contract and recording contract with MCA and thereby be free to begin anew with another recording label. The $500,000 bill led Petty to file for bankruptcy on May 23, 1977, showing the rest of the world, and especially MCA Records, that he was willing to put his money where his mouth was. The move was astonishing in its audacity. By declaring himself bankrupt, Petty froze all the lawsuits and forced MCA to the negotiating table. When MCA saw the potential of what could happen if all their recording artists learned this trick, it gave in, and Tom Petty renegotiated both his publishing and recording contracts to his and the band's advantage. The record label responded by creating Backstreet Records specifically to re-sign Petty to a $3 million contract under the parent organization's umbrella. Happy with his new business deal, Petty released his third album, Damn the Torpedoes, through Backstreet. That album went triple platinum and became a career-defining landmark. Tom Petty later admitted to his biographer, Warren Zanes, it may have been a sham in some ways, the bankruptcy strategy, but it worked. And it didn't just work for Petty. Petty's groundbreaking bankruptcy claim stands as a benchmark for artist rights and as an example to the music industry. The musician's defiance inspired several other artists to demand better treatment and to take creative action against unfair contracts. Petty used bankruptcy not as a surrender, but as a weapon. He declared himself financially ruined to prove a point that no corporation owns a human being. And the music industry has never quite been the same since. Courtney Love, from Kurt Cobain's fortune to broke, twice. Courtney Love is a rock star in her own right, fronting Hole, recording critically acclaimed albums and building a career as an actress. But when Kurt Cobain died in 1994, she inherited control of something far more valuable than her own catalog. Cobain's publishing rights. Courtney Love is a successful rocker in her own right, but her real money comes from control of late husband, Kurt Cobain's publishing rights. Those rights generated enormous wealth. Nirvana's music was, and remains, among the most commercially valuable catalogs in rock history. And yet Love ended up broke. Not once, but twice. In an interview with The Fix, she said she was too out of it to pay attention to what happened to the money. After Cobain died, she was doing drugs from the moment she woke up till the time she went to bed. When it came to finances, Love just did what she was told to do, and by the time she realized what was happening, she was totally broke. The scope of the loss is breathtaking when you consider what she was sitting on. Cobain's music generates millions in licensing, streaming, and sales every single year. She and her daughter, Frances, had to move in with Love's stepfather to avoid homelessness. She even claimed they didn't have enough money to eat. The image of Kurt Cobain's widow and daughter unable to afford food, while Cobain's songs played on every radio station in the world, is one of the more jarring contrasts in rock and roll history. Then, in 2013, Love again said she was near bankruptcy because money had been taken from her accounts by what she called douche-lords. However, as one outlet noted, controversy has raged over the veracity of her claims of poverty. Whether every detail of Love's financial struggles is precisely as she describes them, the pattern is undeniable. Love's story is a haunting illustration of what happens when grief, addiction, and misplaced trust collide at the same time. She had the money. She had the assets. She had the publishing rights to one of the most important catalogs in rock, and none of it was enough to protect her from the storm she was living inside. The verdict, what going broke really looks like. 10 rock stars, 10 different paths to financial ruin. Some were betrayed by managers and family members they trusted with their lives. Some burned through fortunes on drugs, mansions, and lifestyles that demanded more money every single day. Some simply refused to believe the ride was over. Despite hit songs, sold-out tours, and millions of sold albums, many famous rock stars have found themselves facing bankruptcy. The myth of the rock star lifestyle suggests that once you reach a certain level of fame, the money never stops. But the reality, as these 10 stories show, is brutally different. In some situations, artists seemingly made all the smart financial moves, only to have a trusted ally swindle them out of fortunes. Billy Joel and Leonard Cohen learned that the hard way. Lavish lifestyles don't come cheap. The IRS is always looking to get its share. Mick Fleetwood, David Crosby, and Sly Stone can confirm that. What separates those who recovered from those who didn't often comes down to one thing: the willingness to go back to work. Leonard Cohen toured 387 shows in his 70s. Meat Loaf waited a decade for his comeback. Dee Snider hustled on the radio. Tom Petty turned his bankruptcy into a career-defining power move. The money can vanish in 100 different ways. The question that matters is what you do the morning after you discover it's all gone. These 10 rock stars answered that question, some triumphantly, some tragically, and some from inside a van parked on a street in Crenshaw.